say thank you to Les Lehman and the Social Justice Committee for inviting Mayor Tracy Upchurch to Westminster St. Augustine. On behalf of the residents and the team members, I'd like to welcome you to our campus. We're very honored that you're spending time with us to share your goals and objectives for beautiful St. Augustine. Turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Mignon. Thank you, Tracy, for coming. Tracy sent me some, I asked him to send me a resume, and those of you that have been trying to use your computers today, there's what he sent me. So, Tracy, I haven't been able to use that, but so I'm going to make it up as I go, all right? It is my pleasure to welcome Tracy Upchurch, Mayor of St. Augustine. I can't think of anyone that represents the idea of being a true Floridian like Tracy. Not only you're born here, but I think you did say that your family had been here for 180 years. Is that right? 180 years, that's almost as long as Florida has been part of the United States. So Tracy's heritage here goes a long way back. I know that he left to attend college at Davidson College, came back, went to law school at the University of Florida, go Gators. Then came back to St. Augustine in what really is a long tradition of family legal practice in the city. And for many years, something over 2 decades, I think, practiced law here. And during that time, Tracy's never one person that since I've been acquainted with him, that does only one thing at a time. So the time that he was practicing law, he was also serving 2 or 3 terms in the state legislature, a couple of terms on the city commission of St. Augustine. I think at a previous time you were also mayor, right? Sometime in the 90s. Was a mayor at that time. And then, you know, like some of us, eventually see the light. And Tracy decided to give up the law, and he went back to the University of North Florida, got a master's degree in history. Go history. All right. And then came, he never left St. Augustine to do that, but then changed directions with his career and took a position as associate professor of legal studies and history, law and history at Flagler College. And of course, during that time, again, the city turned to Tracy when there was a vacancy in the mayor's office and asked him to finish that term, and then he was reelected again. So Tracy's got a long history with St. Augustine. Now he began, I know the last time he was mayor, he was still in his teens. But at any rate, he does go back quite a long way. His family is rooted here. He and his wife Beth and 3 children? 4 children. 9 grandchildren? 9, I got the 9 grandchildren right. Anyway, Tracy is with us today to talk about his views on St. Augustine and hear some of your questions. So Tracy, I'd like to welcome you as my friend and fellow here at Westminster St. Augustine.
So when I forget this, you'll all remember where it is, and I'll come back and get it. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've had the chance to speak to different groups here. I still refer to it as Glenmore, And it's always been a pleasure. I've had lots of friends, members from our church, former clients that have lived out here and have been happy here. And so I have fond memories of being here, and I appreciate so much the invitation to be back. I really appreciated the questions. And the nice thing about doing something like this is it requires me to reflect and to focus my comments. And I think there's two places. The first I'd like to do is this. Mayor of St. Augustine is a grand title. I love it. It's a wonderful city to be mayor of. And being a mayor, particularly of a town like St. Augustine, it's extra special. Next week, I'm actually going to fly to Washington, D.C. for a reception at the Spanish Embassy. One of my former professors at UNF is being recognized with an honor from the Spanish government. He's a dear friend of St. Augustine's, of our community, and the city manager and I are going to go there and to support him. But the mayor of Palatka doesn't go to the Spanish Embassy very often. And so the wonderful thing about St. Augustine and the place that we hold in our country's history, in our country's culture, is unique and wonderful. The King and Queen of Spain have been here twice, the parents, the son and his wife, on different occasions. Things happen in St. Augustine that don't happen in other communities necessarily, and that's a special, wonderful thing. The mayor of St. Augustine is a part-time job. And so really my duties under the charter are very simple. I chair the meetings. I sign, that's my Queen of England duties. I sign documents on behalf of the city. And I do ceremonial events. But I do not run the city on a day-to-day basis. We have a city manager, a professional city manager who does a phenomenal job of running the city. And so I'm merely one of 5 members on a board, and I chair the meetings. But the title of mayor maybe gives me a little bit more of a platform, and it's one that I welcome, but I don't want people to be confused by what really the job and the title is. During the last year with COVID and Confederate monuments, and people hear what Lenny Curry's doing in Jacksonville, well, Lenny Curry is an executive mayor. He's elected, he runs the city on a day-to-day basis, and he has a staff, and that's what he does. But the mayor of St. Augustine does something entirely different. The other thing I think that's confusing is, I dare say that if you were talking to your friends and they asked where you lived, you would say St. Augustine. And of course, you don't live in St. Augustine. You miss St. Augustine by about 10 or 15 miles. But your mailing address probably says St. Augustine, and it orients us in time and space. And so I had 2 letters last week from people complaining about their garbage not being picked up. Well, folks, they don't live in the city. We pick up our garbage. I said, it's lovely to say, please write your county commissioner. When we closed the beaches, I should say when the county closed the beaches over COVID, I got all sorts of letters demanding we reopen the beach. I don't have any authority over beaches. And so it does, our way of work here is confusing to folks. And I understand that, but I want you to be clear. The other thing I would say is just kind of a prefatory remark, is there used to be a time when St. Augustine was the center of everything in St. Johns County. That has not been true for decades. The St. Augustine's about 15,000 people. We're affectionately known out the county administration building as the dot. We're merely a dot in the map. What's the county now? 270,000, something like that. We're 15,000. And so our influence, maybe it's a little bit like London. We think of London as a major world metropolitan center, but the reality is the city of London is just a small piece of that much larger whole. And maybe that's where St. Augustine is in the context of the county. I think where I'd like to begin is really starting with the protests, the disturbances, I don't know the right word for it, that occurred in Charlottesville, I believe in 2017, that resulted in one person's death and was broadcast and disseminated widely. There became a very active conversation in the city about what to do with our Confederate memorial. Our memorial is the second oldest in the state of Florida. It predated this heyday of Jim Crow monuments. It was originally erected on Catholic property because the federal troops, the federal government would not allow it to be erected in the plaza. And this was a monument to Confederate war dead, young men from St. Augustine who had died fighting for the Confederacy. There are some cultural, historical, sociological interpretations of the monument, what it meant at the time, etc. But it was originally constructed on property granted by the bishop, the Catholic bishop, and as soon as occupation ended with the end of Reconstruction, they very quickly reassembled the monument in the plaza. They being defeated Confederates, and established this monument where it existed for, 150 years or so. With Charlottesville, we were under increasing pressure to do something about the monument. One of the things that we did was to have it under video surveillance 24/7. We were very concerned about somebody, whoever those somebodies might be, of physically damaging the monument. It was never damaged. Ultimately, the City Commission, this is prior to my time returning to the Commission, decided to contextualize the monument. And many of you know this history, forgive me for repeating myself. And they met in earnest, and it was a lovely cross-section of the community, and they developed 4 plaques that attempted to explain what this monument meant in a wider historical, cultural understanding or background. And then the world changed the day George Floyd died. I think it's important for us to remember in many ways how that changed. The state of Mississippi finally decided to remove the Confederate battle flag from their state flag. Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben, the land of Lakes Indian, the Washington Redskins were all banished as logos, as promotional material, because there was simply a sense that it was no longer appropriate, that there was an insensitivity there, that it conveyed a mixed double message that we did not need going forward. And in countless communities across the nation, particularly in the South, these types of monuments were removed from public space. Some mayors, like Lenny Curry, did it in the dead of night. Lenny Curry was trying to set up for the Republican National Convention that was scheduled to come to Jacksonville because it had gotten kicked out of Charlotte. And he's got a crew, and he's got a big wrench, and he's got a newer monument. And they did it in the dead of night. And lots of people complained about it, but the fact is, it was in storage. The deal was done. So, the city, a month after George Floyd's death, now imagine this, a 10-hour Zoom meeting, dozens of people speaking in person. All the commissioners are either in their homes in different locations. Dozens of people came in person to speak. The city clerk then read 300 emails. Yeah. I would pause and say something that's really interesting is these were not form emails. You know, oftentimes on a public interest, it's one after another. There's a generic one, you just send it under your own email account. These were, by and large, thoughtful, deeply felt on both sides of the issue. And then I think we also, gosh, for a while we were doing phone-in comments. So sports radio comes to City Hall, and so it was a grueling day. A large police presence, a large media presence, and the commission voted 3-2 to relocate the monument. We were very clear that we were not, quote unquote, destroying it. We were not putting it in storage, that we were going to relocate the monument. The city manager had the forethought that we had a crew that was staged, that was going to physically protect the monument regardless of the outcome. Because whether you were happy or whether you were disappointed in it, the monument, which had for 3 years, been the focal point of anger, frustration, all sorts of emotion, we were now concerned would be destroyed by or vandalized by one group or another. So we immediately encased it in plywood, put a construction fence around it in an effort to protect this historical artifact. Long story short, it was a long, grueling, and difficult summer. Number one, this thing was a beast to move. There's no wrench big enough. It's dug out. We literally, let me pause. We contacted 11 movers, structural movers. Every one of them said no. Because what happens in Florida is that when I contact a mover and they send a proposal, that's a public record. And so we had opponents that daily were submitting public records requests to see who we were talking to. And as soon as they see Smith moving from Charlotte, North Carolina, they started contacting and candidly harassing Smith movers. Smith mover says, life's too short for this, and would back out. So we reach a point where we have no mover, and we sure as heck don't have a place to move it. National Cemetery will not take it. The Huguenot Cemetery would not take it. Palomado Cemetery will not take it, all of which would have been appropriate. We don't have any place to move it. And it's sitting there kind of bubbling in the city plaza. We were able to communicate with the anti-monument group to stay home. You won this. Stay home, let us move it. We don't need you down there protesting or doing anything. That makes it infinitely easier on law enforcement. Because law enforcement now just has to take care of one person. They don't have to worry about keeping two groups apart. And let me tell you something, I learned all sorts of wonderful things about law enforcement. Once the rally's over, everyone kind of scatters through town. And so you three run into these three, and you all have a little fight on St. George Street. And you guys back there run into those people over by the fort, and you all have a little set too. So, our police chief did a masterful job of taking care of the city, the community. Constitutional rights were preserved, the monument was preserved. Nobody was hurt. We had 3 arrests. 2 of them were frequent flyers. They were arrested twice. So we reach a point where we've got a monument, we have to move, we don't have a way to move it, and we don't have a place to take it. And then fortune began to turn in our favor. It's a wonderful guy named Jeremy Patterson from Louisiana, a nationally known structural mover. We contacted him, he says, yeah, I'll do it. And we said, you understand there's all sorts of hoo-ha about this? He says, yeah, I'm used to this. And he had a wonderful crew, and he came and he moved our monument, and he moved the University of Florida's monument as well. And then Randy Ringhaber raised his hand. Randy was opposed to moving these monuments. But he said, look, I have a beautiful piece of property, we'll take both of them. And it was a tremendous blessing because it solved all sorts of problems for the community. Long story short, $450,000 later, we put the monument on a barge. We originally thought that we would truck it from downtown St. Augustine to Trout Creek. The sheriff says, you're not doing that. Sheriff says, look, you have to go through 35 intersections and countless electrical power lines that would have to be lifted. You're going to become a moving target as you move through the community for protesters and people that are opposed to you. And he said, we can't do that. We can't close down intersections for you to move a monument 2 and 3 miles an hour through a major intersection. We put it on a barge. We floated it up the intercoastal, Jacksonville, down the St. John's, up Trout Creek, where it had to rest because it was so wet. We couldn't get it up off the barge over to the park. It's now in the park. It has been beautifully, again, Randy Ringhaber paid this money, about $30,000, to create the base. It is now installed. They have retained the interpretation monuments. They have put up period appropriate cannons. They have general loring. They have the Confederate monument. Open to the public, although on private land, still owned by the city. I was having this conversation with my students this morning and trying to explain the rationale. And I would say that while it was a 3-2 vote, all 5 of the commissioners wanted the Confederate monument changed. 2 advocated for an idea of repurposing the monument, making it into a monument for peace or grand veterans monument, or some way reuse the structure. 3 of us felt like it needed to be moved. Symbols are important. Does it cure racism in St. Augustine? Of course it doesn't. Is it a step in the right direction? I think so, and I hope so. Symbols are intended, monuments are intended to send a message. We hear messages differently depending upon who we are and where we are and what time that message is sent. And I think it was the right call to make. We now have another problem. Prior to George Floyd, the city was approached by a group that's in contact and working with the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. If you've not gone there, it's an absolutely fascinating experience. I've never been to a museum that is so argument-driven. This is not a collection of artifacts and pictures, but the curators of the museum are making a very strong argument about slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. But it's a powerful, interesting experience, both the museum and the memorial garden. Forgive me, I'm sure most of you know this. The Equal Justice Initiative has been reporting lynchings throughout the country. And one has been identified in St. Johns County at Orangedale, well outside the city limits, of a gentleman named Isaac Barrett, I think in the 1890s, if my memory serves me. And they, working with EJI, had a monument, what I would call a roadside marker, just a traditional historic monument marker that we see on the side of roads in front of buildings. And they had it installed and were to dedicate it the next day. And that evening was vandalized. It was literally stolen. So all that remained was the post. Horribly disappointing, I'm sure, to the organizers. They then come to the city and said, may we put it in the plaza? In part, this is motivated because we're going to take good care of it. We have a police force that's in the center of town. We're better positioned to maintain, surveil it, etc., etc. Other reasons as well. The commission voted 5-0 to allow the Isaac Barrett Monument to be placed in the plaza. With COVID, with other monument discussions put on the back burner, it has now rekindled itself. I've had hard conversations with these folks that I am opposed to putting the Isaac Barrett Monument in the plaza. I completely support the message. I completely support the message. I'm completely supportive of their efforts that in talking about these difficult things, we get to a better place. But the city did something significant when we removed a monument, that we're changing our understanding about how we use that public space. And lots of folks ask me somewhat earnestly, somewhat facetiously, well, what are you going to put in the place of the Confederate monument? And my response was grass. Because number one, I don't think our community is in a position yet to have a conversation about how we want to use that property going forward. It is, as I said, literally the heart and center of our community. So we are working with them, I'm working with them in conversation of finding an appropriate location. An appropriate location is not shuffling it off to Lincolnville. It is a part of all of our conversation. It is not simply a part of Black history. And we need to, and I have every expectation that we will have a place where the monument can deliver its message about a very difficult period of time in our country's history that clearly touched our larger community. I simply don't believe that the plaza any longer is the appropriate place for that to be. There's lots of things I want to talk to, and I don't know, Mignon, exactly how you want to do it. I'm really interested in sewers and West Augustine and any of these. So let's sit down. That's perfect. I should have gotten dressed up, and I'm really sorry. I realized when I got in the car that I was in blue jeans, and these are my work clothes, and I'm working until about 8 o'clock tonight, and, well, I know, but I apologize. Should have